Welcome to Mishna study, Masechet Kilayim, Perek Gimal Mishna Aleph. In this Mishnah, we're going to discuss what we call the Aruga. It's very famous. It's probably the hardest Mishnah, or one of the hardest Mishnah with the Masechet Kilayim. It comes up in the Gemara Masechet Shabbat. Chamim toil with it. Harambam even says that many people, Rishonim, struggle to understand this, and he's going to explain it in clarity for us. He's going to do so by really jumping into really all his math skills. And it's amazing to see how accurate and precise he was when it came to all these things. You're going to see him using Pythagorean theorem. He's going to use square roots. He's going to really get into it. I'll just introduce, he has some also great lines in this Perusha Mishnah. He's going to quote over here as he's going through the Mishnah in the middle. He's going to explain, goes, and everything I'm teaching you over here is going to be understood to someone who has a real understanding of geometry. But someone who didn't study math, geometry at all, he could accept all that I'm explaining over here. He'll understand it from the pictures, but that's the most he's going to be able to understand. Right? So Rambam is really, he saw math, he saw geometry, he saw outside, sciences, not as bitul Torah, right? It was important to understand the Torah. And over here, you're going to see him really use these tools to explain this Mishnah in such clarity. I'm going to try to explain it briefly, give an overview, and then we'll go into the math, whoever wants to stay along. So this is going to be talking about the Aruga. The Aruga is the mini garden. In last Perek, we spoke about if someone wants to plant a field with different species of grains, right, with different patches of grains. Over here, we're going to plant a mini garden. Now, a garden can be much smaller than a field. A grain field has to be massive to harvest something like that. You plant that in bulk. But people could plant a small garden in their house. The smallest garden you would find is really 6 by 6 tefachim, and that's why we're going to speak about that size in our Mishnah. It's about 1.5 by 1.5. And how many species can you plant in that one garden? So Aruga, Shehi Shisha al Shisha Tefachim, a garden, a mini garden that's 6 by 6 tefachim, Zorim betocha Hamisha Zera'onim. You could plant in it 5 seeds or 5 different species, 5 different types of seeds. Arba'a be'arba ruchot aruga, 4 on the 4 sides of each of the garden, the garden patch. Be'echad ba'imtza, and 1 in the middle. Right? Now, how does this look? Let's flip over here. I'll even show you a real picture first. You see over here, they plant on the top, you'll see, actual 5, you'll see how it's divided out. Let's even go to this picture first because it's even clearer. If you see where I wrote the 4, right? If it's 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim, this whole plant, right? You plant the 4, 4, and 4 on each side, right? So you're planting actually, I would say, 16 tefachim worth on square tefachim, right? If this garden is 6 by 6 tefachim, it's 36 square tefachim. And how much of this are we planting? So we plant on the top border, the bottom border, and the 2 side borders. Now, if you look over here, they're not overlapping. What do I mean? Harambam uses the concept of Rosh Tor. Remember the Rosh Tor, the point? If only points are touching, then this is okay. And that's why when he plants over here, the middle box is planted, right? All the sides are planted except for the 4 corners. So over here, what he's able to do is he's allowed to plant 4 different species, 1 on each of the corners and 1 in the middle. Now, he does this, he's able to really maximize on his little mini garden space. And what does he have to leave open? He leaves the 4 corners open. Why does he have to leave the 4 corners open? Because if he has them closed off, if he has them filled in, right, then they're going to be adjacent to the other species, and that would be considered Kilayim. Right? I have a live shot of this as well. You can see how someone actually planted this, and you'll see he even put 3 seeds on the top, right? But you see he left the corners open. He planted on the 4 sides, and he filled in the middle, right? That's what you could do. Now, I want to just explain the Mishnah first. Hayala gvul tefach. Let's say it was a border around it, a tefach, right? So you added a tefach on each side. So now that mini garden of 6 by 6 tefachim becomes 8 by 8 tefachim. Then you could plant in it zorim betocha shlosha asar. Shlosha al kol gvul ugvul ve'echad ba'emtza. You could plant 13, right? Total, 3 on each border and 1 in the middle. How would that look? Like such, right? he needs to plant, three on each side. He leaves the corners empty, right? And he needs to leave a tefach and a half in between each species, right? That's what you need to leave in between, right? Those are really the two main principles you need to know for our Mishnah. And that is, if corners are touching, it's okay. You're not allowed to have sides adjacent to each other, parallel to each other. And if you have two species, the minimum amount of space you have to leave in between is a tefach and a half. So if he has 8 tefachim across the side, he could leave a border tefach, plant one tefach, leave a tefach and a half, plant another tefach, leave another tefach and a half, plant another tefach, and then leave the border, right? So he has 12 going around, and then you could put one in the middle, right? One big one in the middle. Now, he can't plant a turnip head on the border. Why? Because it's going to fill it up, and then it's going to really take up a lot of space, and it's going to look like Kilayim. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says you could have 6 in the middle. What does that mean, 6 in the middle? So if you look, he's talking about the 8 by 8, right? So he's planting 3 on each border, so that's 12 going around. And then if you look in the middle, he has 6 triangles in the middle. So instead of putting one big triangle in the middle, he puts 6 triangles in the middle. Now, it makes a lot of sense according to the Rabbi Yehuda, right? And we're going to have to explain why Tanakama didn't explain like this as well, if it makes so much sense. Now let's go back to how we got to all these numbers. And Harambam is going to have a few kushiot in this Mishnah. So we'll do our best to explain. Actually, let's back up all the way to the beginning. So we spoke about the aruga, the garden. Now, if a person wants to plant, right, he wants to maximize his space. So when he plants in the top, how much is he able to plant? Well, if it's a 6 by 6 aruga, right? If it's a 6 by 6 garden, he leaves the 2 corners empty. So he's planting 4 tefachim on each side. So 4, 4, and 4, and 4, right? So 4 times 4 sides is 16. So you get 16 square tefachim. And in the middle, he's going to get 8. He's going to get 8 square tefachim. How do we get 8 tefachim? So over here, you're going to have to use a little bit of Pythagorean theorem to figure this out. We know that he took up a tefach on each side, right? So if it was 6 tefachim over here, if you go across the diagonal, right, of the square, so you're going across the diagonal of the square, right? That's going to be 4, right? And now if we break up that square into 2 even triangles, you're going to have 2 right triangles. If you have the hypotenuse of that triangle, we know is 4, right? We could use a squared plus b squared equals c squared to figure out what both of the sides are. Once we isolate and we figure out what both of those sides are of that square, then we can figure out what the area of the square is. So that's what we're going to do over here, right? So if we figure that the hypotenuse over here is 4, right, the square root of 16. So, right, so it ends up being the square root of 8 plus the square root of 8 equals the square root of 16. So now if we figure out what's the square root of 8, that's 2.8. So 2.8 is one side, the other side's also 2.8. If you multiply them by each other, you can get the square area is going to be 8. So the area of the middle is 8 plus another 16. So he's able to plant 24 square tefachim out of the 36 available. That's pretty good. Right, that's pretty good, and that's what our Mishnah is suggesting to do over here. Now, Harambam asks, right, this is how it will look. Harambam asks, I have a better way, right? And it's genius, right? I have a better way of doing this. I could set up a totally kosher aruga by having a 1.5 tefach, right? If I go 1.5 from the corner, another 1.5 on the other corner, right? I'll be able to have 2.25 square tefachim on each, right? So that would come out to 9 total before all sides. And in the middle, I'll be able to get 18. So we're talking about getting 27 out of the 36 instead of 24 out of the 36. So what about this, right? Why don't you explain the Mishnah this way? So Rambam says, first of all, how do I know the middle is 18? The middle is 18 for the same reason, right? Because I'm taking, 6 across, right? Again, I'm taking the hypotenuse as 6, which ends up being the square root of 36. So if the side is the square root of 18, right, that means each side is 4.24, and the area comes out 4.24 times 4.24 comes out to the area is 18. So that's 18 in the middle, plus another 9 on the sides, that's 27, right? So now Rambam asks, what about this? So Rambam says, yeah, that's okay. You could actually plant like this as well, right? This is totally fine. Now, the Mishnah itself, right? What about the Mishnah itself? I would just point out, right? Rambam didn't mention this, but the Mishnah itself did not use this example. It did actually. This wasn't the example the Mishnah used because the Mishnah spoke about it being on the sides, not the corners. Right? That's how I understand it. But I would just have to point out when Rambam spoke about the first case over here. I'm going to back up. This one, he points out that we're talking about this garden patch when there's nothing else around it. It's in a desolate area. It's isolated. There's no other gardens around it. And he says, why? Because it's a gezerah, that you may plant something parallel to this bottom tefach, parallel to the corner in one of these things. And if you plant something in the parallel to the corner of it, you line it up literally, right, where it says tefach, and you planted another garden that's like literally overlapping that bottom. Let me see if I can even get my finger over here to show you where it is. Right over here, right? If you plant something right over there at the bottom, okay, and you start and you have a whole nother field that comes out this way, and you overlap just that one tefach, that would be no good, right? Why? Technically, it should be fine. Only the corners are going to be touching. Right? That should be totally fine. But Rambam says you may come to plant something like this. And over here, you're allowed to fill in the corners. Right? So that's why you're not allowed. And that's why our Mishnah says everything that we're speaking about over here in our Mishnah is beharava. It's in a desolate area. Okay? So now we explained there are two options. You have an option to plant 24 tefachim, an option to plant 27 tefachim. They're both kosher. Now, if you have a border, you add an extra border of a tefach going around the entire thing. Now you just extended the aruga to 8 by 8. Now, how much of this is planted, right? So again, if you have you have 3 on each, the tefach on each side, right? Separated by tefach and a half between each one. So you have 3, 3, 3, and 3, that's 12, plus another 18 in the middle, right? Now the 18 in the middle, we know again, because the hypotenuse over here is 6. We had this one before, right? The area of that is 18. So 18 and 12 is 30. So you're planting 30 out of the 64, right? Because it's 8 by 8 now, right? So you're planting 30 out of the 64 square tefachim. Okay, that's good. Now the Yehuda comes, and what does the Yehuda say? The Yehuda says you could plant 6 in the middle. Now the Gemara, the Rambam points out the Yerushalmi. This is fascinating. The Yerushalmi over here speaks about so you can plant 6 in the middle. What about Tanakama? Why doesn't he allowed to plant 6? And they don't come up with a response. And Rambam over here almost answers the Gemara's question. And he goes, I have an answer. It's not that Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on Tanakama and saying you're allowed to plant 6. He's saying you're not allowed to plant 1. Because if you plant 1, it would fill up the entire thing and it would look like it's an actual garden or whatever that 1 was, right? So if you filled it in like this, right, then he said you can't plant a garden like this. You can't add other little species around it because that 18 area in the middle, that's massive. It looks like a garden of whatever you planted in the middle, right? If you planted tomatoes in the middle, that's it. It's a tomato patch, that's it. And then the Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says, you're allowed, Tanakama says, you're allowed to plant 1 in the middle. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you have to plant 6. Right? It's very interesting. It's amazing. It's amazing how Rambam over here is almost, I guess, answering up for the way the Gemara was trying to explain it and said, you could have explained it like this and made so much sense of it. And he does it. It's bold. Now, I just need to point out that why is this okay when you have 6 in the middle? 6 in the middle is okay because separating between each one is 1.8 tefachim. That's okay. We said you have to have a minimum of 1.5, So that's going to be okay. How do I know it's 1.8 tefachim? Okay, again, use Pythagorean theorem. Harambam actually says over here, he goes, we know because it's the 1.8 tefachim, he goes, because it's the square root of 3.25. And if you understand how I'm figuring out this whole, this is right, if you understand how I'm figuring out this whole Mishnah, you'll understand how I got to this number also pretty much. And he's using the square root of 3.25. How do you get the square root of 3.25? Again, because he broke up one of these diamonds, right? One of these, it's really a rhombus, right? He broke up one of these rhombuses into a right triangle, right? And if each one we know is 2 by 3, right? If you go across the middle of each one, you draw a line through the middle of each one will come out to 2 tefachim wide by 3 tefachim tall, right? That means if you're going to draw it to the middle, right, to the middle point, if you draw a right triangle, as I did over here, you'll see in the picture, you'll see that each one is the triangle. You have 1 on one side, 1.5 on the other, right? Half of 2 is 1, half of 3 is 1.5, right? So 1 squared plus 1.5 squared is 2.25 equals 3.25. And you have to get the square root of 3.25, which comes out to 1.8. So 1.8 is enough. 1.8 is fine. That's enough space to separate between seeds. But Rambam asks, why don't you plant 9 in the middle? How would that look? Next slide. This looks like 9. Look, you have 9 in the middle. Why can't that be okay? Because if you measure it, right, you're going to see that you only get 1.4 tefachim separating between each seed. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda says you can plant 6 in the middle and not 9. Right? How do you get 1.4? Same idea. Again, just follow along on the side again. It's this, again, it's much easier, right? 1 squared plus 1 squared equals this, equals 2. So take the square root of 2, ends up being 1.41, right? And that's really the hypotenuse is 1.41. That's under 1.5, and therefore you're not allowed to plant 9. And Rambam does ask a more general question at the end, and he says, I have a very good option for the first part of the Mishnah. When we had the garden of 6 by 6 tefachim, why can't I just plant 9? There's an option to plant 9 seeds. Why is the Mishnah saying you could plant 5, 4 on each side and 1 in the middle? I have a much better idea. Plant 1, leave a tefach and a half, plant another one, leave another tefach and a half, and then another one in the last corner. It's a great idea. And then you're able to spread it out and you're able to plant 9. And Rambam answers, and he says, this technically would be okay. Now, not everyone agrees with Rambam over here. Rosh, Rash, they disagree. They say you cannot plant like this. Rambam says technically it can be okay. And our Mishnah didn't mention it, not because it's asur, but rather because the first option of planting 5 seeds is a better option, because over here, you're barely planting any of the field, any of the patch, right? You're only planting 9 square tefachim out of 36. Whereas if you're planting 5 seeds, you're getting 24 out of 36. So it makes so much more sense to use the option, right, that the Mishnah gave. You're allowed to plant 5 different seeds when you're able to, maximize on space, maximizing literally 2/3 of the aruga. Whereas over here, technically this would be allowed, right? According to Rambam, technically it will be allowed, but the Mishnah chose not to mention it because you're really not maximizing on space. You have to almost plant one little seed in each spot. So that really sums up the Mishnah. It's really a great Mishnah. I highly encourage you to review it, look it up inside, review it, play with the numbers yourself, and enjoy it.